The government has been arguing that there was a period of time between when the words came out of the judge's mouth and when a written order was filed. Based on the written order, they say they didn't violate the judge's order. That'll be debated in court for some time. I do want you to hear what President Trump had to say. This was overnight as he was on Air Force One coming back to D.C. He was asked directly, did the administration violate a court order? Here's his response.
You know why they have to ask that, right? Funny thing, you can't just go around demanding the impeachment of a judge because he disagreed with you or provided a ruling that wasn't in your favor. This is why John Roberts had to speak out.
Well, that's a start, you know.
Even he was recognizing that you're doing too much. Calling for the immediate impeachment of a judge doesn't even begin to take into consideration that there's proper channels that you have to go through. Failing to go through those channels circumvents all of the rule of law that people have built up over the years. Thus, what they're trying to avoid is you just becoming the law unto yourself. So the statement went as follows, that a judge on Tuesday demanded more details from the Trump administration on 2 deportation flights that took off this weekend, despite his order temporarily banning the removal of people from the United States under an 18th century law. So the 18th Centuries Act that they were specifically referencing, the Alien Enemies Act of 1798.
Now the Trump administration has invoked the Wartime Alien Enemies Act to deport hundreds of alleged members of a Venezuelan gang to El Salvador. The deportations were announced after a judge had temporarily blocked the effort on Saturday, raising questions over the legality of the move. NBC News White House correspondent Aaron Gilchrist joins us now on all this. Hey, Aaron, good morning. So walk us through how and why the White House deported these people, even though there was this court order forbidding the move. Remind us what that court order said.
Yeah, so Savannah, it's a little convoluted, probably not surprisingly, but the White House has been adamant that it did not violate this court order that came down on Saturday. If we back up a little bit, the ACLU went to court on Saturday based on the fact that it believed the president was going to somehow invoke the Alien Enemies Act of 1798. And in that process, the judge issued a restraining order that was later rewritten a bit to be more expansive, to include all non-U.S. citizens who were in custody in this country. At the same time, the president signed a proclamation that enacted this Alien Enemies Act and directed members of his administration to deport these particular gang members, these Venezuelan gang members, out of the United States. There's debate now about whether there was a plane in the air that should have been turned around based on the judge's order that was not turned around. Went on after the judge verbally issued that order. The government has been arguing that there was a period of time between when the words came out of the judge's mouth and when a written order was filed. Based on the written order, they say they didn't violate the judge's order. That'll be debated in court for some time. I do want you to hear what President Trump had to say. This was overnight as he was on Air Force One coming back to D.C. He was asked directly, did the administration violate a court order? Here's his response.
I don't know. You have to speak to the lawyers. I can tell you this. These were bad people. That was a bad group of, as I say, hombres. That was a bad group. When you look at them and you look at the crimes that they've committed, you take a look. You don't get any tougher. You don't get worse than that.
Now, just a couple details in regards to the act that's being invoked. The text of the Alien Enemies Act says it can be invoked whenever a war is declared between the U.S. and any foreign nation or government, or invasion or predatory incursion is perpetrated, attempted, or threatened against the territory of the United States by any foreign nation or government, and the president makes public proclamation of the event. In other words, if the U.S. is at war with any other country, or a foreign nation or government has invaded the U.S. or threatened to, a president can then invoke the Alien Enemies Act.
Right.
This is the part that's messed up about him calling for the judge's impeachment. Trump wrote on Truth Social, this radical left lunatic of a judge,
Damn.
a troublemaker and agitator,
Damn.
who was sadly appointed by Barack Hussein Obama, always says the full name for some reason.
And then we beat Barack Hussein Obama and whatever the hell dynasty that is.
Sadly appointed by Barack Hussein Obama, was not elected president. He didn't win the popular vote by a lot, and I'm sure he wanted to emphasize a lot. He didn't win all 7 swing states. He didn't win 2,750 to 525 counties. He didn't win anything. I won for many reasons. In an overwhelming mandate. Didn't he win the popular vote by just over 2 million? And didn't Biden beat him by about 7 million? So I digress. He didn't win anything. I won for many reasons in an overwhelming mandate, but fighting illegal immigration may have been the #1 reason for this historic victory. Funny, I thought it was groceries and the economy.
I won on two things, the border, and more than immigration. You know, they like to say immigration. I break it down more to the border, but I won on the border and I won on groceries.
I'm just doing what the voters wanted me to do. This judge, like many of the crooked judges I'm forced to appear before, should be impeached in caps, with exclamation points at the end. We don't want vicious, violent, and demented criminals, many of them deranged murderers in our country. Make America great again. Ooh, spicy words. Now, if a regular citizen says this, it's one thing, but when you have the President of the United States making the statement, it holds a lot more weight, especially when he has a bunch of followers that are willing to go to bat for him. What this could do is it potentially compromises many judges' positions, in that because they have a fear or the backlash of the call for impeachment, it does just raise up the potential that they might just give him a victory or rule in his favor just to not face the backlash, which in and of itself would be crooked. Because you understand, Truth Social and Twitter, when Elon speaks and when Trump speak, people parrot their comments. No one will be making the argument that you shouldn't deport criminals. No one is making the argument that you shouldn't deport gangsters. What this is a situation of checks and balances, which if you've been paying attention to Trump's presidency run so far, he's been skirting around those checks and balances as much as he can. And remember what I said about parroting? The very next comment on Truth Social, Trump puts his post up, and then this is said, impeach corrupt liberal activist judge. So ruling against Trump gets you deemed an activist? Gangsters, get rid of them. Criminals, get rid of them. But why not go through the proper channels?
We're supposed to help our people.
The process just takes too long. So John Roberts, after witnessing what's being said online, issues a very subtle, small statement, but very straight to the point. He said for more than 2 centuries, it has been established that impeachment is not an appropriate response to disagreement concerning a judicial decision. The normal appellate review process exists for that purpose. In short, don't just call for impeachment just because a judge made a decision that wasn't in your favor, or a judge is just asking you, follow the rules. Caroline Leavitt was even asked about the judge's verbal orders to not deport anyone in this manner. Listen to what she said.
About the judge's written order, which hit the docket Saturday night at about 7:26 p.m., but he issued a verbal order before that at about 6:45 and 6:48 p.m. based on the court hearing, a verbal order from the bench. Does the White House feel the need to comply with a verbal order from this judge?
Again, as I said, all of the planes subject to the written order of this judge departed U.S. soil, U.S. territory before the judge's written order.
But what about the verbal order, which of course carries the same legal weight as a written order, and said for the planes to turn around if they were in the air?
There's actually questions about whether a verbal order carries the same weight as a legal order, as a written order, and our lawyers are determined to ask and answer those questions in court.
Very, very slick with the verbiage. Written order as opposed to verbal. And the person she was discussing that with was Caitlin Collins, who then later on went on to make a full commentary about all that was being said.
Tonight here in Washington, there is a tone of defiance coming from the White House as a federal judge is still waiting on answers from a Justice Department that doesn't seem eager to provide them following that testy court hearing today. Now, all of this started when President Trump invoked a rarely used wartime law called the Alien Enemies Act to deport hundreds of alleged members of a Venezuelan gang from the United States to El Salvador. Now, those deportation flights were carried out on Saturday.
Yeah, it's alleged, but I see those tats. Come on now.
Saturday night, despite a federal judge telling the administration to turn the planes around and return to the United States as these legal issues were sorted out. Judge Boasberg was back in court with Justice Department attorneys tonight, and while no cameras were in the courtroom, the CNN team who was reports that it grew contentious as the administration attorneys repeatedly stonewalled a clearly perturbed judge, refusing to even answer basic questions from him, leading him at one point to place his hands on his hips and shake his head with his eyes closed. At one point, he summed up the Justice Department's reasoning as, quote, "We don't care, we'll do what we want." The Trump administration, on the other hand, is arguing it did not violate Judge Boasberg's order since it was initially an oral directive and thus, quote, not enforceable. In plain English, they're saying that he said it out loud, but he has to write it down before it's real. Now, the timeline of all of this is crucial, and we've charted it out here for you because it was 5 p.m. Eastern on Saturday afternoon. That is when the judge kicked off this initial hearing over Trump's attempt to use these wartime powers to deport these alleged members of the Venezuelan gang. Now, it was briefly adjourned 22 minutes later for the government to collect more information. In that time, 2 removal flights took off en route to El Salvador, which had agreed to take in these Venezuelan migrants for about $6 million. But after 6:45 p.m., the judge verbally told the Justice Department to turn around any planes that were carrying people being deported under the Alien Enemies Act. And the verbal order came after 2 flights had taken off, but before they had landed, and before a 3rd flight had even taken off from the United States. Now, the written order from the judge came about 40 minutes after that. I've been working to chase down the details on this timeline, when the administration got this information, when they found out what the order was, and that included at today's press briefing where we sought answers on where they draw the line between a judge's verbal order and a written one.
We're assuming still that they care. So we talked about Roberts and the 1798 Aliens Enemies Act, but the White House briefing itself, it wasn't done there. There were some more questions that were pressed on trying to find out details. They all wanted details. When did you leave? When did you get the order? When did you know this verbal order came down? That will all hold sweeping precedent for what's to come in the future. And much like what I said about some of these judges, many of the reporters that are inside of these briefings, they go way too light on these questions. They don't really press for details because they know if you press too much and you push back a little too much, well, you'll just get the AP treatment.
Is the administration prepared to give the court what it wants in terms of the time of the flights that departed, that went to El Salvador, and some of those details that the judge is asking for in trying to determine the timing? Clearly, the 5 named individuals were not deported in compliance, but looking more broadly, wanting to know about the timing of flights and so forth, because the verbal order did say turn around the flights if there's an issue. So is the administration prepared to provide that information?
Verbal again.
I'm prepared to provide it right now. All of the planes that were subject to the written order, the judge's written order, took off before the order was entered in the courtroom on Saturday, and the administration will, of course, be happily answering all of those questions that the judge poses in court later today.
And for people who have due process questions about making certain that there wasn't anyone who was swept up who did not meet the criteria that you laid out, is there a way for the administration to provide more detail about how that was determined, who the individuals were that met this deportation order?
Yes, I can assure the American people that Customs and Border Patrol and ICE and the Department of Homeland Security are sure about the identities of the individuals who were on these planes and the threat that they pose to our homeland. They take this incredibly seriously. They are putting their lives on the line to deport these designated terrorists from our country, and they should be trusted to do that. And that's exactly what the American people elected this president to do.
Thanks, Caroline. Just to follow up on that then, so you're saying definitively that the administration can prove everyone that was put on those flights to El Salvador was either a member of Tren de Aragua, MS-13, or some other entity?
We've already provided the breakdown in the effort of transparency about the 261 illegal aliens who were deported. 137 of those were deported under the Alien Enemies Act. 101 of those were Venezuelans removed via Title VIII, which, as you know, are just regular immigration proceedings. And 23 of them were MS-13 Salvadorian gang members. There were also 2 MS-13 ringleaders as part of that group of 23 who President Bukele particularly expressed his gratitude for their return so he can demand justice in his home country.
You know why they have to ask that, right? It's because when you see articles like this one, families of migrants who believe their relatives were deported by ICE say they weren't gang members. This is being proposed by ABC News, because if it was gang members you rounded up, that's one thing. But are you sure you didn't sneak in a citizen in there? Maybe a permanent resident?
Now he's a philosophizer.
Was there anyone in there that was supposed to be afforded due process that didn't receive it?
MS-13 ringleaders as part of that group of 23 who President Bukele particularly expressed his gratitude for their return so he can demand justice in his home country. Jennifer.
What criteria, though, other than, say, tattoos or maybe being in the wrong place at the wrong time, are they using to determine that someone is actually a member of one of these organizations?
Intelligence and the men and women on the ground.
And the teardrop. The teardrop tattoo. Definite giveaway.
In the interior of our country, who are finally being allowed to do their jobs. Their hands were tied under the previous administration. And as I said, they take their jobs very seriously. They should be trusted.
He asked the question, what criteria are they using to identify the people that are actually gang members as opposed to just people that look like they're gang members?
Member of one of these organizations.
Intelligence and the men and women on the ground in the interior of our country who are finally being allowed to do their jobs. Their hands were tied under the previous administration, and as I said, they take their jobs very seriously. They should be trusted and respected by the American public with this operation. And of course, as I said to Kelly, the administration will provide all details to the questions that the court poses.
He did say intelligence was in there, so clearly everyone that was deported was supposed to be, so there shouldn't be any discrepancies with anyone. All right, we're gonna stop there. I just want to go over that one with y'all. Leave your comments in the comment section. If you guys enjoyed this video, don't forget to drop a like, and I will see you again on the next one. Be easy, y'all.